Cool. All right. So go beyond the mat part two. Let's get personal. Today, as I said, I'm going to go a little deeper into what is it that I'm actually doing about these different kinds of yoga that I talked about, and what is it that, pick and choose you can do. So as a reminder, there's only one right yoga, yours, right? I do think that there's gazillions different approaches, but really in the end, it's about your practice of connecting and really having that vertical and horizontal integration that we talked about last time, where it's like, how do I connect to who I is, and how do I connect to who not I is, right? Other res alles reality. And we talked about the different aspects of the human operating system, chakras, all that good stuff, all the different dimensions, and really how, for me, yoga is about bringing yourself into resonance, right? So that these different pieces of myself are not like seven different instruments playing seven different tunes, but actually trying to at least kind of get into the same chord structure, at least, kind of at least somewhat sound okay, and not like a complete cacophony. And really this idea of practicing alchemy in the sense of constantly creating yourself, right? Really using yourself as a lab, knowing that you have this limited time here, one day you're going to be gone. What are you going to do in the meantime with it, right? And really having fun with it and enjoying practicing and enjoying this culture of practicing. And the idea of really overcoming resistance, right? That you really use these different tools to practice constantly getting over your own bullshit in a way. And we talked about these different kinds of yoga. Hatha yoga is sort of the purity of the vessel, right? Devotion, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga in terms of wisdom, karma yoga in terms of actually doing things out in community and actually creating value for other people and therefore creating belonging. Raja yoga as your personal expression. Tantra and Kundalini, I put those up there, as I said last time, more or less randomly, not quite, but these higher levels of yoga where it's really about activating specifically neuroplasticity and particular brain functioning that you can activate through these practices. And I'll talk about that a little bit as we get concrete here. So let's get concrete. So in general, really I've chosen a monk's life, and for me that means an ascetic life, but it doesn't mean that I'm running around with a beggar's bowl and only eating what people put in my hands, like some of the monks do, but really about understanding life as a constant practice. Right? That it's really about always practicing being yourself, right? And the old word ascesis in Greek actually means exercise, simply exercise, right? It just means exercising, practicing being you, right? And always being in that mode. And if I think about me, right, the very, very basic thing, I think I talked about that last time, is this 30-foot long worm, right? Starting here with those big lips and ending, where the sun doesn't shine, right? And there's this like 30 foot of tube, and everything else around it really evolved so that this gets better food and can procreate, right? And in some ways, that's even like a sort of a spaceship, because there's about 1,200 different species that live in it, right? Actually, most of the DNA in your body isn't actually yours. Right? There's about 1 trillion beings that live inside of that gut, and around you about maybe 4 or 5 feet out. Right? So there's this little microbiome that you're actually constantly walking around with. And in some ways, I think it's actually a little dangerous at the moment that we're not encountering each other. Because part of what we're doing when we're even walking by someone on the street is exchanging, right? And we're actually teaching each other things just by simply walking by the street on each other, right? And now we're actually kind of trying to keep that distance all the time, which is a little weird. Right? But this is sort of my basic OG self, right? This is elementary canal. And of course, garbage in, garbage out. So here's the very first thing that I'm practicing myself as much as possible, is to think about what is it that I'm putting into this vessel. I'm an omnivore, I have to admit. I'm not one of those smart people who, eats just plant-based or something. And actually, I did try that at some point. I did try a raw food diet at some point, and I got so hyperactive. It was insane. I could not, it totally triggered my ADHD, and I needed to actually find something to ground myself down again. But it really did not work for me. For some people, that's the perfect diet. Awesome, right? Didn't work for me. Again, there's no right diet. There's yours, right? And really figuring out what works for your system and what doesn't. Now, within that, very, very basic is, of course, if you eat processed shit food, probably not so good for you, right? I mean, even if you think about refined sugar, that goes through 40 different stages of processing before we get high fructose corn syrup and crap like that, right? And your body doesn't even know what to do with it. But if you eat a Snickers and you drink a Coke, your immune system pretty much shuts down for the next 2 hours because you're so overwhelmed by this thing that your body is freaking out about. right? And so really not the best thing to do to yourself, right? And if you want to kind of go really basic, start with really dieting and eating nothing for a moment, right? And fasting or having intermittent fasting, also very good for you. But then if you go fast, really introduce things slowly back into your diet and see what works for you and what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Right? Brown rice and vegetables, probably not a bad idea on the very basic level. Or, might have heard of a khichdi, super cool little yogi food, right? It's just rice and mung beans or mung dal cooked together. And then you can kind of build from there and build and introduce different things back into your diet. But if you have never done it, might not be a bad idea to actually kind of cleansing yourself once and then kind of start adding foods back in as an experiment if you want to play around with nutrition. Overall, though, as I said, the more whole foods, the more organic, the more, basic the food is, the less processed, probably better for you. And that's really what I do myself. And I'll get back to how much I love cooking. But if I think about my daily food is super simple. Like if I think of, and also relatively consistent. That's the other thing. Your body actually likes consistency. So if you think about your staple foods, whether it's your snacks or breakfast or even, but for me, lunch, for example, is usually just protein and greens. Right? It's like a simple thing, but different proteins, different greens, but pretty much protein and greens is my standard go-to. And my dinner, since I've moved back to Germany and they have really good bread here, has simply been bread and cheese or bread and some cold cuts or something, right? But very simple and relatively consistent. Right? And then I can go crazy and do that other thing. And I do believe in those 80% diets in the sense that if 80% of your diet in the quotation mark is actually kind of good, then do with the rest of the 20% whatever you want. If you feel like a burger, eat a burger. If you feel like drinking a Coke, drink the Coke, eat the sugar, whatever. Make sure that your 80% are good, right? That you're not habituating crap food. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So nutrition is one. The other thing is hydration, right? Water, water, water. We're made of water. Most of our body is made of water. So why wouldn't we drink water? A lot, right? And especially now in the winter time and it's hot, or if you live in a hot climate, right? You're sweating all the time. And if you're right now inside here in Germany, it's freaking cold. And the heater is on. It's super dry inside, right? So even having a humidifier or drinking lots of water, good idea. And if you don't like the taste, great. I actually personally drink it medicinally. I wake up in the morning and the very first thing after I brush my teeth is 2 or 3 big glasses like this. I chuck them down before I have my coffee. Right? Part of what that does is actually flushes all the crap from the night that's been sitting around through your system. Right? And then one thing that helps me to remember to drink water is actually like sort of once an hour after getting up, I either drink or eat something. Right? And so it's actually going into that rhythm of once an hour, either a little snack or real food or water. Right? And this way I know I'm going to drink enough water throughout the day. Right? Plus also I'm not mixing the two. Right? One of the crappiest things you can do really is to actually drink a bunch of ice water while you eat. Right? Because especially when you have fats, think about fat, right? What happens to fat when it gets cold? It gets hard. Right? So imagine you're eating something and now you have this liquid, beautiful liquid fat and grease in your body. And now you drink a bunch of ice water on top of it and all that stuff freezes and it actually rips little holes into your gut lining and into your stomach. It's not good for you at all, right? And so there's this things plus in general liquid while you're eating. What you're doing is you're diluting all the stomach acids. But if I'm eating something and just eating something, then my stomach acids can go and do its work and digest the food. But if I'm putting a bunch of water in it, now I have this like mushy soup thing. Right? That's really not helping me digest, and I'm actually getting far less of the nutrients, and actually most of them get flushed down and become shit. Mm-hmm. So kind of actually doing one or the other is a pretty good idea, right? Eating or drinking. Then of course you got to move it, right? When people talk about yoga, they usually think about movement, right? And this is the 1, 2, 3 formula is a beautiful friend of mine who unfortunately is not longer with us. But years ago, she was experimenting with cortisol because she had a lot of stress situation in her life. And she found for her the best formula was this 1, 2, 3 thing. And it was essentially 1 hour of walking a day, 2 times a week doing heavy exercise, and 3 times a week doing some sort of stretching or subtle yoga, light yoga. For me, the way I do it, oh, interesting. Oh, there you go. Funny. For me, it's usually when I look at my week, I kind of do that thing. I habituate it, that Mondays is exercise day, Tuesday is sort of a light stretch, or in the summer, right now I'm too lazy and it's too cold out there. Some running, right? Light running. Wednesday is yoga day, like, to do a real like long yoga practice. Tuesday again, light yoga. Friday again, exercise, and Saturday and Sunday is yoga. And this way, you're also giving your body a chance to recover, right, between the exercise things. And if you're actually working heavy exercise every day, if you work the same muscles, it actually doesn't really help you build it, right? Or if it doesn't help you strengthen it, right? So one thing you can do is actually do heavy exercise and then stretch. General stretching is a good complement. But if you think about dancers, for example, they have more strength than a lot of bodybuilders, but they're much leaner. Right? And the reason why they're so lean is because they're stretching. Right? If you're stretching, what happens is you're actually breaking muscle fiber, and then it grows back denser. Right? So the muscles are actually not as big. But if you want big muscles, heavy weights, right, like bodybuilders do, and then it gets essentially swollen. Right? Versus if you want strong muscles that are lean, right, make sure you stretch after you work out, because now you're breaking the fibers and the fibers become denser and thicker. In terms of exercise, tons of different ways of doing it, of course. People, I don't like gyms personally. I think it's like, I don't have the time. B, I'm just to go there and come back. B, I used to travel a lot. And so then going somewhere in a new city and be like, okay, where's my gym? Where do I find a gym? Sometimes it's in a hotel, sometimes it's not. For me, that's too annoying. So the two things that I do is either, on a very basic level, there's a 7-minute exercise, which if you look that up, 7-minute exercise, there's some cool apps for it too. Very, very simple stuff, right? Just, very basic things, but all the major muscles get moved, right? And you can do multiple iterations of that 7 minutes if you want to do more, but you actually don't need to work out that much. Like if you want to have a basic level of fitness, 20 minutes 2 or 3 times a week is plenty. You don't need more than that in order to just have a simple level of fitness. Right? So in terms of working out every day, you don't actually need to. And there's an interesting book by a body hacker called Tim Ferriss called 4 Hour Work Week. 4 Hour Body. He also wrote 4 Hour Work Week, which is also a fun book. I'm thinking about how to work differently. But he wrote a book called 4 Hour Body. And he's really talking about all the different things you can do to hack your system that are actually saying you don't need to put that much effort into it. This whole working out every day, not necessarily required. The other thing I found after the 7-minute exercise, because I did go to a personal trainer at some point and asked him about, what else can I do? And he said the problem with the 7-minute workout is if you just use your body weight, you can't really build big muscles or really a lot dense, whatever, more performance muscle. So what I found, let's see if you can see it, is TRX. Total resistance training was developed by a Navy SEAL. It's essentially just straps you can either attach to the wall or have them at the door here. But these things, you can pull yourself up and pull yourself down and do all kinds of crazy things with it. There's tons of different online guides for it. But it's a super simple strap you can put anywhere. And if you want to build, like especially back muscles, which I needed to in terms of posture and really supporting myself better, for that, the other exercise wasn't quite sufficient. So at the moment, I'm actually doing that. Well, for the last few years, I've been doing that as my Monday and Friday exercise. Again, a great tool, highly recommended, super simple, and you can do tons of different exercises with it to also very specifically work on different muscle groups. So that's kind of I forgot about body. The other thing in terms of Hatha yoga, right, is the whole cleansing the system, cleansing your weak vessel. So after brushing my teeth, tongue scraper, right? If you don't have one yet, highly recommend it, because there's all this gunk at the back of your tongue that collects there, and just like getting that out, super cool. But now actually, I don't feel like I've brushed my teeth unless I do this too. Right? And so even at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, it really is just getting that gunk out. Very, very helpful. And then the other thing, neti potting, you might have heard about. I like this particular kind. It's called Rhino. It's super light, which was great because I travel a lot, right? Super light thing, made from plastic, of course, but hey, BPA free. But the idea is to actually flush through, your system with water that's heated to like lukewarm water and with salt in it. So it kind of mimics the idea of tears. Right? And I do that nearly every morning, not every morning, but especially in these days, it's kind of nice to know that you're flushing through, especially after we went outside and saw people, you can flush through with that. So that was kind of the last piece. that I do on body as well. Then second chakra in terms of erotic dissolution, right? When I talked about that last time, the idea being that by devoting yourself to something or someone, you dissolve yourself, you dissolve your ego, right? Because you're becoming part of something bigger than yourself. Right? You're becoming part of a relationship or part of connecting to a god or connecting to a princess up in the tower back in the day, right? When they did sing the songs to them, there's the same idea of devotion, right? You're actually not trying to get in bed with her. You're actually trying to simply, like, by praising her values and by praising her characteristics, bring those out in yourself more. At the moment, I don't have a erotic goddess to dance with, which is sad as it is, but it's a whole nother long story. So that's obviously one way you can practice it, though, is to actually be devoted to someone in a relationship, making sure that you don't cross over into codependence, right? Because as I said, the dark side of erotics is that you actually become so enmeshed in oneness, or we're together, that you actually lose yourself too much, right? And then you also become dependent in the sense that if one person feels good, then you can't feel bad, or if they feel bad, you can't feel good. And then you play these stupid little power games with each other to make sure that you're aligned with each other, right? And this is where we have to remember that there's a difference between second chakra eros and partnership, right? Romance and partnership are two different things. Anybody, you're married, that sometimes you don't like the other person. That's okay. That partly happens as long as you have some clear agreements and a foundation to work on as partners. But the other thing you can do here is simply gratitude. And this is something I practice every morning, is to actually remember that it's amazing to be alive, right? That it's really exceptional that we're even here. And to feel connected to everything, to feel connected to life, the easiest way to do that is to think of something that you're grateful for. Right? And taking a couple of moments in the morning to really set your emotional tone. Right? And so when I activate my bio robot in the morning after all the physical stuff, I do spend a moment to practice gratitude and just remind myself how amazing it is and how rare and how exceptional that we even get to be here. Right? And finding a few things. And what that does, as soon as you think about something that you're grateful for, it even puts your heart rate variability into coherence. Right? So that part in between the beats of your heart, right? That heart rate variability, it goes into total coherence. There's some beautiful studies by the HeartMath Institute that showed that. And your whole system comes into coherence and relaxation. Right? And so even when you're stressed, one thing you can do is think of something that you're grateful for. And immediately as you do that, your whole being shifts. Right? And the reason for me to do that in the morning is so that I have an emotional baseline for the day. So that when things become stressful or when there's stuff that gets me off kilter, I can always come back to, oh, this is how I felt this morning. Remember? Let's start there. Let's go back to that. And easy way to do this too, in terms of habit stacking, do it while you brush your teeth. While you have 2 minutes while brushing your teeth. So while you brush your teeth, think of things you're grateful for. And so really you can use that time too, instead of thinking about all kinds of other things while you brush your teeth. So it's one way I practice, that second chakra, that feeling safe, right? That second need, as I said, the first chakra is these physiological needs, right? Food, shelter, sleep, all those things. Second chakra needs a safety, right? Feeling okay, feeling safe, right? And this is also what pranayama does, right? If you do pranayama breathing, conscious breathing, as soon as you take a deep breath, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which releases about 1,200 different chemicals into your system, making you feel relaxed. Right? So even breathing and conscious breathing is also a very good technique to activate second chakra. Third chakra, right, the mental solar plexus, mental Apollonian thinking, the linear thinking, is all about discernment. Right? Vivek, you might have heard the concept in yoga as well, the idea, importance of discerning what's what. Right? And remembering that we have no clue, right? That we only know what we know words for. Right? But if I know a word for something, I can see it, I can grasp it. And the more words I have, right, the more distinctions I have, the more refined I can grasp reality. I take the example of tea. Right? If you know tea, then you know tea. If you just know tea, that's it. If you know the difference between black tea and green tea and white tea and herbal tea and fruit teas, right? Suddenly you know a lot of different things, right? And once you know even more about the different kinds of herbs you can put in there, suddenly you have a whole universe to learn about. Right? Same thing with like wine, for example. Right? For someone, it's just wine to get hammered. Right? For someone else, it's like, ooh, this is a bouquet of blackberry and forest, whatever. You smell it there, right? But again, the more distinctions you have, just like your palate has more distinctions, the more distinctions of reality you have, the more refined you're also seeing reality. And of course, a good part there is to just start with shutting it all down, right? And really just sitting in silence. This is me in India a few years ago. I was near the foothills of the Himalayas. My friend Barry took that. Actually, Barry, he took that picture, and I was sitting there meditating. And at some point, the dog came, just like sat down and chilled with me. Apparently, I was so relaxed that the dog came to relax too. Laurie, you probably have that experience with your dog sometimes, right? When you're all quiet and chill, and you're actually in a beautiful field, and the dog comes and says, "Oh, this feels good. I'm gonna hang out here," right? And they just like hang out with you because they can sense you, right? And it's really that level of prana, right, or ki or chi, like that part that is again around you. There's a field that it feels yummy when you feel good, right? When you feel relaxed, when you feel nice, and you want to be around people, right? We can sense that and feel that with people as well. So at the moment, for the last couple of years, I've been playing. I'm about to be done with it. I think I'm going to give it away because it annoys me. I've been playing with this thing called Muse. It's a little headband, right? It's an EKG. You put that on your brain like this, and it actually measures your your brain waves while you meditate, right? And so it gives you direct feedback, right? So while you're meditating, you hear little sounds, and if you if you're not relaxed, you'll hear weather sounds going. And the more relaxed you are, like her little bird tweets. It's kind of fun to see, especially if you're new to meditation or you're teaching people meditation. It's a fun thing because you get direct feedback. Right? It even tells you afterwards, you were 64% relaxed today. So it actually gives you a little feedback afterwards, but it gives you that feedback even in the moment to remind you to just pay attention to the moment while you're doing it, which is kind of nice. And I like this exercise. I think I might have shared that last time too, but like I like the idea of like in your mind, your mental body, you can only think one thing at a time. Right? It's a linear process, and you can't think anything else if you're thinking something out loud in your head. Right? So this was an exercise that a shaman taught me many years ago. And because I said, I'm always thinking, and the average human thinks between 12 and 60,000 thoughts a day, depending on which research you look at. And it's a little hard to tell because, like, when did you think? What is a thought? So it's a little hard to actually measure that in the first place. But sort of what we've, if you look at the research, it's between 12 and 60,000 thoughts, and the majority of them is repetitive and self-defeating. Right? If you think about all day long, how many times you actually put yourself down, or think, well, I'm not good enough, or I should have done this better, or I should have done that better, or this could happen. Right? Thinking also creates time, right? Because once I have a word for something like glass, I can say, where did the glass go? Is the glass coming back? The glass was here. Is it coming back? Right? But past and future only exist on that level. Right? If the body has a rhythm and cycles, nature has cycles, but there's no time. Right? Your dog's not going to come to you and say, hey, it's 5:45. Usually you feed me at 5:30. Right? But they have rhythm, so they're hungry, right? And so they might come to you and say, hey, I'm hungry, but they're not going to think in time. That's a very human thing to do, right? Because we've developed symbol systems. And so if you think something, like I'm the one inhaling, I'm the one exhaling while you're doing it, you can't think anything else at the same time. So next time you kind of get overwhelmed with too much thinking, try I'm the one inhaling, I'm the one exhaling. Partly also what mantras do, right? If you think Om Mani Padme Om or something like that, and you do that in your head, you can't think anything else, right? So it's a really nice way to just shut it up, right? When people talk about mindfulness, I think actually mind emptiness is a much better idea. The other thing you can do with negative thinking is replacement thoughts, right? Especially a lot of negative thoughts that we have about ourselves do repeat themselves. So take a moment and actually write them down. Right? Take a piece of paper on the left side, write down those negative thoughts that keep coming up. And then on the right hand, right next to it, write thoughts that are also true. Right? And so, for example, like, oh, I'm dumb. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm still learning. Right? Or I can't do math. Well, I can learn more. You can come up with a replacement thought or a counter thought that actually balances the negative thought. Right? So this way, when you find yourself having this negative thought, you're like, oh, I know you. Right? I wrote you down the other day, and here's my other thought. And then you think this other thought, and you actually feel much better. Right? Because if you think shitty thoughts, there's this thing about, isn't it like induction currents, where when you have crappy thoughts, You feel crappy emotions. If you have crappy emotions, your whole body gets stressed, right? And releases negative hormone, not negative, but like hormones in your system, like cortisol, that make you feel stressed and negative, right? And so controlling your thoughts, or not controlling them, but actually being the master of your thoughts rather than their slave, is probably a good idea. And then that fourth level of, karma yoga, of actual action and creating belonging through connecting to people and adding value to their life. And the first level is, for me, it's about integrity, right? Like saying something and actually doing it, right? Because every time we say something, or we say we're going to do something and we don't do it, we tell ourselves that we're not reliable, right? And it goes to even little things like time. Right? I'm a stickler for time, not because I was born in Germany, but because I'm like, I know if I say I'm going to be there tomorrow at 2, and if I'm not there at 2, I'm telling myself I can't be trusted. And then even if I don't even consciously notice it, right? But people who are constantly late, there's also a mushiness around their agreements, right? And it's hard to rely on them. You don't know if you can really trust them, right? And if you think about intimacy and trust, it's built through fulfilled agreements, right? If you say I'm going to be there tomorrow at 2, right? Or shared vulnerability and fulfilled agreements, right? To be vulnerable with each other, and to say when they say they're going to do this, they actually do it. Right? And that builds trust and connection with each other. Right? So talking about others, obviously community is a big part as well. And there's one thing one of my teachers taught me once, is this idea that there's 6 sort of key relationships in life. Right? The first one is family. Right? And some of us have really shitty families. We're born with that. It's nothing we can help, but we can still be in a power position around it. Like, for example, if you have a bad family, or a family that you don't really like hanging out with, you can say, hey, listen, guys, you're my family. By default, I kind of have to love you, but let's not talk for the next quarter. I'll not check in next quarter. Right? And taking that power back for yourself, so that you're not, at their disposal and at their whatever whims. Right? The other thing is actually to be proactive. One of the things I learned from my ex-wife was to call my mom regularly. Right? Because back in the day, when I first, many years ago, when I first moved to America, I think it was like 2 months later, my mom called and was like, "Are you alive?" And she was always worried. Every time she called, she was worried. You know what I mean? Because she didn't hear from me. Right? So every time we talked, she's like, "Are you okay?" Right? And I had to listen to worry all the time. And I'm like, oh. And I learned, if I call them regularly and I ask them how they're how they're doing, suddenly we talk about some completely different things and they don't worry about me anymore. Right? So actually being proactive can also be really helpful. Second, relationship with partner, as I said, that's a blind spot for me at the moment. I'm actually, aware of the fact that I'm also not seeing myself, because other people are mirrors, right? All of these relationships are mirrors for ourselves. And there's certain things that only your partner will trigger. Right? Like, I'm sure that all of you have had the experience of being really fucking annoyed and angry or being annoyed by your partner in some way because they pushed some button. And like, your mom couldn't push that button, your dad couldn't push that button, your siblings couldn't push that button, your friends couldn't push that button, but your partner, they know exactly where that is. They go right for it, right? But that's what they're for too. They're there to show us these aspects of ourselves and bring out certain aspects of ourselves that nobody else brings out, right? And so, as I said, I'm aware that that's a missing mirror for me at the moment. But we'll see if that, at least I'm conscious of it. Let's start there. And then, of course, there's your friends, right? And friends are people where you have a sense of being uplifted, being held, having fun, learning together, like growing together, and really managing those as well. Right? And I think with all of our relationships, it's important to every now and then take stock and take, inventory of what's happening, what's working for you, what's not working for you. Right? Because we all evolve, we all grow, and especially if you're in a path of self-development, you're changing, right? And maybe the friends that you've had from years ago are not necessarily supporting this new lifestyle of yours. And it's okay. It doesn't mean that you love them any less, right? Or that you think that they're bad people. It just might not be the person that you want to hang out with all the time now, right? And being clear about that, and actually letting them know that you're transforming and changing and being honest about it is a really helpful thing. And then, of course, there's your community at large, right? And I wrote an article a while ago called "Stop Networking, Focus on Community," right? Because especially if you're independent, you think you need to network and stuff. It's about community, right? Really, the community, and for me, community has 2 dimensions. One is the people that you can support with what you do, and the second is the people that can support you in supporting more people. Right? The people that actually support you in helping, or give you the tools and give you have your back in terms of helping others. So being really conscious there too, and being conscious of value exchange, right? And really knowing that time and attention all have value, and that if you give your time and attention to someone, then there might be some value coming back. I don't know, having a portfolio there. Like for example, I do paid work with corporate clients or with entrepreneurs, and then I do portfolio work that I do free for people, right? Because I like giving, right? But if I did for a while just do free stuff all the time and ended up broke, so that didn't work. Or if you just work for other people for money, it's kind of empty too. And that joy of giving freely is also something that, is a beautiful thing to have in life. So finding some ways of balancing that for yourself. And then there's sort of a relationship with yourself or with your own genius, right? And really taking the time to pay attention to you. Right? I mean, you have 8,760 hours every year. Spending a couple of hours, here and there to just ask, who am I right now? What's going on in my life? What wants to emerge? Who have I been? Right? Who could I be next year? Right? And actually thinking about your life consciously. Right? Because it's so easy to get lost in the everyday rat race of just do, go to work, do these things, take care of family, blah, 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 right? Run around. It's easy to get lost there. So to spend a few minutes, a day or an hour here and there, an hour a week maybe, to just simply be in relationship with yourself, right? Also an important thing. And for me, it's, as I said, even having a morning ritual. And on my Medium site, you have a whole article on morning ritual because it is about activating all of those different chakras, at least for a couple of minutes. Spending that time with yourself every day, truly important, because then it means you're taking yourself seriously, right? And you're actually really owning your life. And finally, teachers, and that can be, yoga teachers, it can be mentors, it can be psychologists, it can be gurus, whatever, but someone who's more interested in your growth than in maintaining the relationship, right? Because it's something, for example, where your friend or your partner, they won't give you certain feedback because they want to maintain the relationship, right? They want to make sure that you stay their friend. They want to make sure that you stay their partner. So to have someone ask you the really difficult questions and really show you that mirror that you might not want to see, right? Where you can even leave the session like, oh, fuck you, I hate you so much, and like go back for a year and then go like, yeah, they had a point, right? But like that person that gives you that kind of honest feedback, right? Like in my profession, actually, to some extent, that's the hardest part of my job, is to give people, quotation marks, negative feedback, right? Because it's easy for me to be a cheerleader, be like, yeah, you're doing awesome, right? That's easy to do, but to say, hey, this is really not working for you, is it? Right? That part is a little bit more tricky because a part of me likes to be liked too, right? And so to really own that my job is to really let people know what I see, whether they like me for it or not, right? It's really the job of a teacher. And so to have that for yourself, and in many traditions there's this concept of lineage, that if you have students, make sure you have a teacher, right? Because if you only have a teacher, right, you're going to get fat from all the knowledge. And if you only have students, you're going to run yourself dry, right? So you need that flow of having both input, having a teacher, and, as I said, can be all kinds. For last years, for me, it was actually a voice coach, because obviously I talk a lot and I used to mumble even more than I do now and speak even faster than I do now. And I'm learning to actually speak better. Thank you. So it's getting there. But even that was also a question, because it wasn't just about speaking, right? It wasn't just about mechanics or moving my mouth or learning to actually remember that I have an upper lip. It was about expression, right? And really, like, what am I willing to say? What wants to emerge from me, right? And connecting to that. So it was really fifth chakra work. It wasn't just, as I said, mechanics. It was really the connection to voice and what that means, and owning that. So kind of key relationships, and, see what that means for you and how you can build those relationships so that it feeds you and supports you. Like in the Veda somewhere it says that ideally these relationships should feed you so that you're like a mother's breast so heavy with milk you're ready to explode, right? You're like full of life energy, right? Because they're all supporting you. You feel so good, right? You feel so full, right? So this is really the point of community. And then as I started talking about expression, right, voice, have something to get it out, right? I mean, start with a journal, right? That's a very simple way of just get it out. Take some time to journal every day. Ask yourself a couple of questions, write something. right? If things bother you and you're starting to think about things too much, write them down, right? Because what you do by writing them down is you're externalizing them, right? And you're actually putting them out there. If you just think about it in your head, you can keep thinking about it, keep thinking about it, keep thinking about it, keep thinking about it, keep thinking about it. Like, for example, yesterday, I was in a meeting and somebody said something that I was actually offended by. Right? They talked about white men and mansplaining, which I'm doing right now. But at least it's just a proper forum for it. And yesterday I wasn't doing it. And I was like, oh, there's so many white men, it's all just mansplainers. And I'm like, well, not every white man, just because I like my gender, has to be a mansplainer. And I was kind of offended. And I woke up with it this morning. It was still in my head. I'm like, oh, this is really pissing me off. So I wrote him, her, it, they, sorry, wrote them, right? I wrote them. I didn't send it, because ultimately it wasn't really that important, but I needed to get it out, right? And just writing it down and writing them was helpful, because then it wasn't in my head anymore, right? And so if you have something that bothers you, write it out, get it out, and find some fun ways of expressing yourself too. Like for me as a kid, I was actually just visiting my mom earlier today, and it was funny. I saw a mirror that I made when I was 10. Right, she was actually making mirrors herself at the time, or learning how to make mirrors. And so I had this mirror where I like etched out a part, and I drew a little rainbow and made some clouds and stuff, and it was super cute. I was like 10 when I made it, right? And but I saw that, and then there's some sculptures that I made from metal. Back in the day, when I lived in the brewery, Whitney, you might have seen those. I had some sculptures on the wall that I made where I learned etching, right? Because a friend of mine learned etching. I'm like, "Ooh, this is cool. I want to learn how to etch." And so I etched in copper. Then when back in the day when YouTube was not a thing and YouTubers weren't a thing, I did this whole series called Monk Day, right? Because I learned that most suicides happen on Monday mornings. And I'm like, oh, let's do something fun and silly on a Monday morning. And I made a Monk Day. And I actually recorded 107 episodes of this. That is still somewhere on the internet. The website got hacked at some point. I think they're still on YouTube, and it was actually kind of hard to find a moment ago. But when I looked for this picture, but I made all these like silly little episodes. Long before YouTubing was a thing, and I had like 5 likes or something, so nobody ever watched this, and it didn't matter. But it was just a practice of getting it out every Monday morning, and I actually did it consistently for 107 Mondays. And made, in a silly costume, and talked about all kinds of spiritual stuff and tried to make that as silly as possible. These days I do food. For me at the moment, I love cooking, and so actually like making food, eating my friend the octopus here, horrible, intelligent being. But, making food for me is a way right now to express myself, right? It's just an art form that I'd like to play around with and try new things, right? So find something where you can express yourself, right? And where it's just fun, where you don't have to know how you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be judged for anything, but just getting it out, just having fun with it, right? And finding some way to express yourself. And then 6th chakra, right? The weaving, the self-regulation, right? And it's really Tim Ferriss calls this 6th chakra the meta-programming circuit, because actually in this circuit you're able to look at all the ones below and reprogram them, right? And it starts with visualizing, right? And visualizing something and actually taking the time every day to visualize your future, right? Because if you don't envision the future, where are you going to go? Right? You're just sailing around in darkness, right? Because the vision is sort of your light at the end of the tunnel. It's like that aspirational thing that you want to move towards, right? I love this image of yoga as a bird, right? Where you have the bird and the head is always looking at the horizon and saying, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing I can see? Right? And then you have your wings, which is your ability to adopt new good habits and let go of habits that don't serve you any longer. Right? And then you have your tail, which is the fact that you are a habitual creature in the first place. Right? 90-something% of what you do every day is habitual. And it's okay, because if you didn't have habits, you wouldn't be able to talk and walk and do these basic things. Right? So we're all habituated creatures. And the key is to say, okay, what habits are serving me? What habits aren't serving me? Right? And how do I get there? Right? If I want to go there, what does that mean? Right? Like, for example, last year I had this exercise of myself at some point where I was in an elevated mind state. And this question came in of like, who do you want to be when you're 50, Philip? Right? Because I was on the path of like beer belly, hunchback, smoky coffee. Right? And I'm like, okay, I don't want to be beer bellied, hunchback coughing guy when I'm 50. It doesn't sound very cool. I want to be sexy yogi guy. Right? Silver fox sounds much better. Right? And so that image, that vision, right, has helped me actually now adjust my habits. Right? Like, for example, I don't smoke any longer, tobacco at least, maybe because that was really shitty for my lungs. And I can't believe I did that for like 30 something years. How stupid, right? But it served its purpose. It did its thing. And I actually, for whatever reason, actually enjoyed it while I did it. And I'm so happy that I'm not doing it anymore. And the thing was actually the last time, second to last time I tried to quit this, I tried to force myself with willpower and it was miserable for a whole month. I was just like fucking miserable the whole time. Like, oh, I can't smoke anymore. The one thing that I like doing, the one thing that was my fun little thing to do, I can't do anymore. And as a whiny little, it was horrible. My poor work colleagues, they had to deal with that shit. Right? But what I learned this time around was actually the neuroscience of habit formation, where when you do something new or something difficult, right, you actually get adrenaline. Right? And it's okay because it's like, oh, new and difficult and different. Right? Like, oh, not smoke. Right? But in that moment to say, you're doing it, man, keep going. This is awesome. Yay, how awesome. Right? And actually telling yourself that releases dopamine. Right? And that dopamine is that whole like, keep going. Come on, you're doing it. Come on, you're doing it. Right? And that actually then releases also acetylcholine, which makes new neurological markers. Right? And these new neurological markers, they will go away unless you go to the next stage, which is actually to celebrate and rest. And then that's when you have serotonin, right? And this is when the new pathways are formed, right? So if you think about even your typical yoga practice, there's this concept of bhavana, right? And bhavana is this positive visualization. And I like before I do yoga, I actually connect to my vision, right? And I use, among other things, one good tool to use is a vision board, right? Because it's a shortcut that gives you kind of markers for what your next iteration of your life could look like. And I actually had me doing crow on there last year, my vision board. And then Whitney taught a class and I got to be in a class and she taught me crow. And now I can do crow like a champ, Thank you, Whitney, So, but it was one of the things I visualized it, right? And then I was like, okay, let's do this. And then universe shows up, conspires to help you to get this vision, right? And here it is, and now I can do crow. But to have this vision board, and the key of vision is to have an emotional connection to it. Right? Because if you're emotionally connected to it, it pulls you there. Right? It's less interesting to know the details of it as much as how you feel when you have it. But especially today, in today's day and age, it seems like we don't even know what's going to happen next year, right? Because there's so much uncertainty. But what would you like to have happen? Who would you like to be? How would you like to feel? Right? And connecting to that, that's that idea of bhavana. And I do that before I do my practice. I actually focus on that vision. And then I do my practice. And it's really, in a way, it's like kneading it into your system, right? When you're doing it. And while you're doing it, right? For example, you're holding a pose, you're like, oh, this is difficult right now, but breathe through it. Come on, breathe through it. Breathe through it. That's that dopamine, right? That's that second part. And then the last part, when you're at the end of your practice, you actually lay in still, like in dead man position or something, you lay still for a moment. That's when you get the serotonin. Right? So if you think about that practice of doing yoga, it's actually needing a vision into your system. Right? Where you start with a vision, you get that adrenaline of like while you're doing stuff, right? And you're giving yourself a dopamine by breathing through it, and then resting at the end of it, really integrating it. And so you're actually building new pathways in your brain. And this is really the key to neuroplasticity. And of course, talking about Tantra, there's that level of sex magic. Right? This is from a movie called Holy Mountain, which is really cool. But one of the things, if you look at nearly every esoteric tradition I know, I mean, from yoga to Kabbalah to Western alchemy, etc., they all have sex magic at the higher induction levels. Right? And the reason for that is that right around orgasm, your brain is actually in a state of neuroplasticity, meaning that it's much, much easier to form new pathways. But so if you think about sex magic, the goal, and both in Eastern thought, where you have Tantra, where you actually hold your orgasm, right, or hold your ejaculation, in particular, that eruptive kind of orgasm, and you have waves of orgasm instead. Or the Western magic, where you sacrifice babies, right? As Alistair Crowley talked about sacrificing babies, all that meant is like drop sperm, right? Like onan, drop it to the ground. I mean, this is a code word, and he was one of those people who loved to like fuck with people, and he's like, oh, they think I'm a black magician? Yeah, I sacrifice babies every day. And I was like, oh, he sacrificed babies, he's just, coming, right? But either way, around that moment, you have neuroplasticity, right? So the key in sex magic is really to think about your vision, Right? And for example, if you do a tantric ritual, to surround yourself with images of the gods that you want to invoke, coming back to that devotion idea of, if you want to be like Krishna, have Krishna around. If you want to be like Kali, have Kali around. Have these different pictures or symbols or mandalas or sigils, right, in magic. Have these different pictures around that in that moment of orgasm, when you're really, really open, deeply imprint themselves into your neurology. Right? This is kind of the key there is exactly that. It's like you're using that energy, right? Because if you think about emotional energy, motion, right, moves things. But if you want to create something in the world, you need the emotion behind it to make it happen. Right? You need a vision that's emotionally connected. And now if you add to that sexual energy, right, then you get some real oomph behind that emotion. Right? And this is really the key here. And practicing that, and whether you have a partner that you can practice it with or practice solo, either way, it's the idea of really manifesting and using that special state of the brain that you can also activate with different agents, right? I mean, that's the other thing I haven't really talked about, but you can activate different chakras with different substances as well. Right? Like, for example, opiates act in your first root chakra. Right? If you take opiates, you're not even here. You're like back to primordial soup. Right? Second chakra is alcohol. Right? It's just like that, hey, I love you, man. What do you say about my mother? Right? It's like that, like, not like, right? Activation. Right? And the third chakra is all the enes, caffeine, nicotine, teine, amphetamine, cocaine, right? All the enes, thinky. I'm like so sharp right now, right? You have all these great thoughts, so many thoughts in your head, right? That's that kind of activation. Right? Then you have THC. I'm going to leave out the heart on purpose. Maybe MDMA fits there. I don't know. That's to be discussed. But like fifth chakra is THC, right? It's a transpersonal drug. Right? When you actually smoke dope, you're like, oh, dude, look at my hand. This is my hand, man. Whoa, cool, right? But you're actually standing, you're transpersonal. You're above yourself, right? You're high. You're above yourself, looking at yourself, right? So that's fifth chakra. And then sixth chakra, that meta programming circuit that is similar to, sex magic or tantra or different practices there, is essentially peyote, mushrooms, LSD, those kind of things that are agents that are neuroplasticity inducing. Right? And so the same kind of work can be done here. Obviously, some of those compounds are not, necessarily legal, which is unfortunate because just like magic has been occult and hidden, right? Because it's been suppressed by those in power, because they don't like people taking, power on their own. Right? You make a really bad citizen follower when you take your own power. But these substances actually also do that. And of course, coming back to what you can also do if you don't have them is breathe. Right? Like Stanislav Grof developed something called holotropic breathing back in the day after he had studied LSD and found how helpful it was in actually shifting people's mind and massively transforming them. And then when it was made illegal, he's like, oh shit, I need to do something else. So he came up with holotropic breathing, which is really yogic breathing, right? I mean, there's a bunch of yoga tools that actually these kind of specific, like fire breath and those kind of tools where you have special breathing techniques, they also induce neuroplasticity as well. Right? So that's another tool you can use there. And ultimately, right, really activating Godhood, that idea of triggering Kundalini, right? There's the Kundalini experience is essentially when the snake rises and you release DMT from your pineal gland. That normally is released when you're doing birth or death. Can also be, a super meta programming experience. And when I say meta programming, if you think about, there's things that you can habituate, right? Where you can practice something regularly and build a habit. And there's things that are deeply, deeply ingrained. Right? When you're a kid, your brain is super neuroplastic. Right? Your brain is like a big sponge of Play-Doh. Right? And every experience you have is like, right, making a big pathway here. Right? And so your basic operating system as a child is pretty much programmed by the time you're 7. Right? And at that point, you kind of repeat the same pathways over and over again. Right? And to change it is really difficult. Right? You can try and habituate something differently, right? And sometimes it works, but those things that are really deep down, you actually need a transformational state. You need neuroplasticity in order to really change that pathway, right? And this is what transformational tools are for. I mean, whether they're entheogens, like I just said, or the higher techniques in different kinds of yoga, like Tantra and Kundalini, the higher level techniques are there to create that neuroplasticity. so we can deeply heal, potential trauma that you might have, right? Because some of us have been told that we're ugly, or that we're stupid, or that we can't do anything, right? Or that we're, whatever trauma we had, right? Those are different pathways that exist, right? Because you have also neuroplasticity in moments of anxiety, for example. When you're anxious, your brain is also very open, right? And so when we've had trauma, at least deep pathways. And so here's where these tools come in for help healing yourself and others, is by creating neuroplasticity consciously, you can actually help them reprogram and heal. And really remembering that we're all evolving here. So thank you. This is all I have for today in terms of download and frontal PA. I'm curious if you have questions, or if there's things that came up for you where you're like, that's crazy. What are you talking about? And yeah, curious to hear your reactions.